Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSP Magazine. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
And here we are. Thanks everybody for joining us here for a new Redefining Cybersecurity here on ITSP Magazine. Always love when you set the layout of the screen and it changes it up on you, right? Technology for you. You expect it to do something and it does something completely different. Who knows? Maybe we may touch on that a little bit today with respect to privacy. Today's topic is around privacy and regulation and how to make the most of what we know and kind of work through the things that we may not know with respect to the laws that are in place, the laws that are forming, and all the standards and technologies that come along with those things. As everybody knows, I know very little about many things, and that's why I have amazing guests join me, and I have Maria de Avanzo and Lyndon Marquez joining me today to talk about privacy. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
And you are muted, Lyndon. You didn't accept the cookie to participate.
We can hear you now.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having us, Sana.
This is going to be fun. So privacy is something that we talk quite a bit about on this channel, Redefining Cybersecurity. And as folks know, the whole point of this show is to help practitioners and security leaders make the most of the challenges they face and finding solutions to help the business succeed without crippling it because of all the controls and policies that get put in place usually. So before we get into this topic, though, I want a few moments from each of you to kind of share with our audience who you are and what you've been up to. So Maria, we'll start with you.
Sure. Thank you, Sean. So I'm Maria Davanzo, and I am currently the Chief Evangelist Officer at Traliant. We are an e-learning online training provider in the compliance, privacy, and HR space. And I joined them about 7 months ago. Prior to that, I was the Chief Privacy Officer and Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer at Cushman & Wakefield for 10 years. And I put in place the compliance and privacy programs at Cushman, and I worked very closely with our Chief Information Security Officer. So, John, on that experience today, I'm sure we'll have some interesting stuff to talk about.
Absolutely. The questions are already starting to form.
And my name is Lyndon Marquez, and I'm currently with Life Extension, and I've been with Life Extension for several months, working primarily in the legal department, but working closely with our privacy officer. Before that, I was with Hilton Grand Vacations, and then before that with Wyndham Destinations. And in those, in my roles there, senior counsel, and compliance officer, I did a lot of work with the developing our programs for compliance and privacy. With Hilton Grand Vacations in particular, I really delved into privacy. I was with them from 2017 until recently, and really this was a kind of a critical time, just because this is when GDPR enforcement of GDPR got underway, as well as CCPA, and really preparing for that and compliance with that law.
I love it. And so many things here now to go on. So I don't know, when I think about a certain topic, I tend to kind of hone in on certain areas. And I don't know, I may be having built applications in the past, I may be more prone to look at things from an application perspective. So B2C and B2P, bit of business to partner kind of apps that let people interact with the business. But both of you have experience looking at users perhaps that are also physically in a building, either an office building or perhaps a destination resort. And I'm wondering how organizations need to look at users from a broad perspective, not just users through an app, not just users on the website, but users that perhaps come and go in and out of the building. And some of those users may be employees and contractors that are there to do HVAC work, right? Or to feed the fish at a famous resort in Las Vegas. So I don't know who wants to tackle this first. Maybe Maria, if you want to kind of go. How do you see organizations and security leaders? We'll just call it security leaders for now. We'll get into some of the nuances of the roles from a privacy perspective. But how do organizations look at the different types of users when privacy comes into the conversation?
Yeah, sure. So you do have to consider the various types of users, and in the commercial real estate services world that I had come from, it wasn't just employees, and it wasn't just folks that are coming onto our properties to help, with the HVAC and whatnot. We also managed properties for clients, and so we sometimes had to be concerned about, our employees that were going to the client's locations and perhaps using the client's equipment, the client's laptops, or the client's cell phones and what have you. And so it became somewhat complicated for us, for me, and for our chief information security officer when we were considering, all of those different groups and all of their different concerns. But as you're thinking of using new software, new applications, that was absolutely part of the equation when we were determining what were the right safety protocols, the right privacy provisions and agreements, et cetera. So for us it was interesting, and my experience is a little bit different than Lyndon's also with respect to the type of data that we worried about, right? So for us at Cushman, at the in the commercial services world, we didn't have consumer data really. It was mostly B2B data, but we did worry about employee data, which I think overlaps with Lyndon. But so it was the types of data, and there's also the types of users of our applications that made it somewhat interesting for us in our programs.
Yeah, because I'm picturing somebody not just with a wrench and some Freon fixing the air conditioner, but there are people that security guards and cleaning crews, and I know I want to kind of lean toward maybe some of the aspects of smart buildings, where there are cards to check in and sensors with perhaps phones and other devices to prove that you're at a certain location at a certain time. Right.
Yeah, you're making me think of
biometrics. All data.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. As I was leaving, Cushman to come here, they were challenged with the biometrics because entering the buildings now was with with the fingerprint or the facial recognition, which really complicated everything even further, if you can believe it.
So, Lyndon, same to you. Your thoughts on this?
Yeah, really, the as Maria said, overlap in particular with employees and the type of data that she dealt with at Cushman and my experience with in the hospitality industry. But really, we did deal with primarily a lot of consumer data, as you can imagine, and really the companies I worked with, really in the timeshare space of hospitality, as well as the rentals, as you would imagine, like with a hotel type operation. So we really had to look at data and really look at how we handle it. As we've got members here, whether they're owners of timeshare, or whether they are kind of the customer who wants to rent something for just a week, but they don't own with us. And so there's a lot of data and consumer data, and in particular when we're dealing with members and owners of timeshare, because we see those owners as they're lifelong, as far as we're concerned. They are part of our club, and so the data that we collect may be much broader than what we collect from from customers who come and just rent for a weekend, for example. And but at the end of the day, we do treat all the data the same. We really want to treat the data with kid gloves. Just I always think about myself or my family, and we provide data if we are staying at a hotel, we go on vacation, we provide data, whether it's for transportation, hotels, whether it is airlines and so forth. And the way we approach it is, hey, how would you want your data to be treated? And that really is kind of the approach we try to keep top of mind as we went through our operations.
And I like that. Like you went there with that, because it's another question I have in my mind, which is how do you approach the world of privacy? I know security has been around forever, right? Not really, but it's been around longer than perhaps a formal privacy role has, or maybe not. Maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong on that. But I have a background in security, so everything for me looks like a policy creates a control that we then align with some standards and frameworks that we can then kind of get a big picture of, here's how we look, here's our posture. How much of that did you lean on? Do you lean on to kind of get a similar picture for privacy, or do you approach it like you were describing, Lyndon, purely from the user perspective, what they would expect from you to protect their data, and do you approach it from that way, and then come back to it and say, well, these are the controls and policies for that, and they either do or don't align with everything else we're doing in the business?
In a sense, that's how it is. I think really, when we look at, especially when we're talking about, a lot of the regulation that has come out, we like to point to GDPR. Kind of, this is, it was just really such a major milestone, especially in the U.S. In Europe in particular, they are miles ahead of us, or decades ahead, however you want to say it. And how they believe privacy and handling of data should be done is very different than, philosophically, than we have here in the U.S. Probably the way we've always done it is looked at, okay, we've got GDPR that came online, and we've got to we know that we have all this data already. We collected all this data. We know that we want to, do the right thing by our customers and by our members. But we also have to run a business. So let's weigh this out. Let's see what the regulations say. And GDPR kind of, in a way, helped us to focus and kind of say, okay, this is how we're going to do it. GDPR may seem like overkill in the U.S., especially back in 2017, 2018 timeframe. It seems like this is really, there's a lot of prescriptive requirements here. But we tried to kind of base it on what GDPR required, and kind of saw, okay, here's where we are, here's where our business is, how we have been handling and how we've looked at data, personal data. And this is what the requirements are now. Let's try to marry this, and also keep in mind that, hey, we're trying to run a business here, and we have to make sure that we don't handcuff ourselves to the extent that we're not doing what our organization was created to do, which is as a business enterprise. So I know that's kind of going around a long way in saying that we do take that all into account, and GDPR, and now with things like CCPA, CPRA, and the state legislation that's coming around, it's giving us a chance to focus more and more, and trying to see, okay, how are we going to balance our business needs with our with the requirements of these laws.
Yeah, I would say that at Cushman, it's probably was a little different experience than what Lyndon had in the hospitality space, right? Because of the type of data that was collected and whatnot. So I would agree, though, that it was GDPR that, sort of kicked everybody into gear, so to speak, as far as, creating an understanding that privacy is an absolutely important standalone function within an organization. Before GDPR, at Cushman, privacy was handled by our then chief information security officer, and it was really limited to him dealing with, some of the Privacy Shield at the time, Privacy Shield applications and all of that. And the general counsel pulled me in. I was chief compliance officer, pulled me in to sort of work with him to make sure that, the legal stuff was all right. But two things happened at Cushman. One was GDPR came into play. And we were global and, of course, had a European presence and European business. And two was Cushman went public. And so when those two things happened around the same time, they were like, oh, wait, we need somebody who, like, this is their, they really are looking after this. And we're putting a program in place, to your point, Sean, right? So the CISO was like, well, I'm not doing that. Like, I have all this other security stuff to do, right? So who's going to do it? Well, I had put the compliance program in place. I mean, really, literally from zero, from scratch. And we talked about it. And it was much like what you said, Sean. It's the same sort of thing, right? You have policies, procedures, controls, frameworks. You put those in place, and you go back and you audit and you make sure it's all working and all of that. And so the natural place for it to fall was with me. And so it did. And so, I had GDPR to sort of guide me, and I had great outside counsel that I worked with. But in addition to that approach, we did also have to worry about, sort of the data piece of it, the users, what does the business want to accomplish here? I remember many heated conversations with the business, myself and the CISO, like, what are these guys thinking? Like, we can't do that, right? We had a client, global publicly traded client, who had health centers and fitness centers on their property that we managed. And the client wanted us just to take that over, right? Applications to be in the gym and writing down health history and, credit card information. And we were like, no, we don't want that, right? We're not PCI compliant. We're not HIPAA compliant, right? And so we had to figure out a way to, sort of make everybody happy. And we found a happy compromise, and we were able to get comfortable moving forward. But yeah, I mean, all of that is absolutely part of putting in place an appropriate privacy program that works. But to your point, cybersecurity and that sort of function and role has been around way longer than privacy, especially in most companies, in most industries. Now, if you're American Express, if you're MasterCard, if you're Visa, like, you've been struggling with this stuff, probably much longer than the rest of us. But yeah, that was my experience with putting a program in place and how we looked at it.
So where are we? Because I mean, GDPR, what you said, Lyndon, 2017, 2018, something around there. It's old news, but still important. There are other things coming. CCPA, I think other states have things in the works, some passed, others coming down the pike. We talked earlier before we started recording that there's a U.S. federal one on the books. Where do we sit? Not so much just from the regulatory perspective. We'll get there in a moment. But just from a mindset, have we, and we'll say we in the U.S. or maybe global, if you want to take it that far, have we mastered GDPR? Are we okay there, do you think, generally speaking? Maria?
Well, I think it just depends on which company you're talking about, right? So if you have a company that's U.S. based, to Lyndon's point, here in the U.S., we just do not think about data protection and data privacy the same way they do over in Europe. I think we'll probably get there, with all the data breaches that you're hearing about regularly, the new laws in the U.S. But I'm not. My feeling is that mindset is not necessarily there. I will tell you that in my experience on the training provider side, I was pleasantly surprised to see that our trainings in the data privacy, data security space are growing. So, that's some proof to me that, we're moving in that direction, certainly. But it was such a it was such part of the DNA and the culture over there in Europe that it's going to take us a little bit of time here in the U.S., I think, to get to where they are over there. Lyndon, would you agree with that?
Yes, I definitely agree with that. I think we're getting there, but in Europe, it was something. This was something top of mind for them. It was a fundamental right for the most part, is how they looked at it.
Right.
And we just don't, in the US, we just have never thought of it, personal data and personal information that way. So it'll take a while for us to get there. I think we're heading in that direction. And especially, I think what helps out in getting everybody on board is, when you see these large settlement agreements for large companies who violated GDPR, that really opens people's eyes. Not to mention something that really, when I was at HGV, all the data breaches and the consequences of data breaches, that really got our senior leaders and the board's attention. Is like, wait a minute, what's our risk here? How exposed are we here? And what can we do about it? So I think we're going to get there. It's just a matter of it's taking longer because it's a shift in mindset of Americans with regards to privacy, and as as the whole situation with data breaches continues to spiral, as well as on the privacy side, the privacy laws from states that continue to evolve and get put on the books in more and more states. I think we're going to get there. It's just going to take longer.
Yeah, it's interesting that you should mention about the board, Lyndon, because I used to report to the board when I was at Cushman on a quarterly basis, and for all 10 years that I was there. And it wasn't until like the last 3 years that I was there that our CISO actually had the opportunity to come in and to talk to the board about what his program looked like, what he was doing. And that, that was interesting. And he did so at the request of the board, right? They were like, we want to hear from, where's Eric? Like, we want to hear from him. What is he doing? Right. And so that's really, interesting. And I think, we've talked about data privacy legislation in the States. And yes, absolutely, that's true. But the other thing that's happening maybe in the background is that the SEC is, proposing that publicly traded companies, have to make disclosures with regard to their cyber security incidents, right? Within, I think, some ridiculously short period of time. I think it might be 10 days, if I'm remembering correctly. And, if that actually happens, that is going to, propel the U.S. forward in the area of both, I think, security and necessarily privacy, because frankly, they go hand in hand. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes and what the impact of that would be.
So all of these things, and I mean, you both of you kind of pointed to large organizations. The organizations you were part of are no small company. And Lyndon used the term hand cuffing the company with this stuff. And I'm just wondering. So as I was asking, where are we? Part of my thought process was, we're probably not, to your point, both your points, we're not there yet, right? Nothing's perfect. We have a long way to go. And if you're a small company, I mean, your whole world is getting your product or service to market and delighting your customers and getting renewals. Who cares about security and privacy, right? So how, and if you do, investments in that area take away from new features, take away from hiring staff that might help customers be more happy and successful. So how do you see those conversations going, or how did the conversations go for you, talking to executive leadership and the board when you had those opportunities to say, this is important. Here's how we measure what our risk is. Here's how we measure the value of addressing that risk to the company. I guess, do you look at it from a risk perspective? Did you end up there? Have you ended up there?
Yeah, you definitely have to look at it from a risk perspective, right? And if you're a smaller company, there's challenges, but there are certainly things you can do, right? Like at the end of the day, you have to know, where your data is, what kind of data are you collecting, where does it sit, how is it protected, do you keep it longer than you really need to, all those good things. And there's ways to do that, without having to be super, super, fancy about it and spend a lot of money on it. You have to have appropriate contracts and provisions with your vendors, right? And the point is, you have to, as a business owner, whether it's small or large, you have to think about these issues, because to Lyndon's point, you read the paper and it's hard to open up a newspaper and not read about some sort of data breach or another. And I have to tell you, because I wore both the compliance hat and the privacy hat, my experience was it was easier. It was easier, believe it or not, to get funding and resources and support for the privacy side of things than it was the compliance side. And the main reason for that is something that Lyndon raised earlier, is we can all relate to it as individuals with data of our own. And so if you put it to the CEO or the board chair or whomever, hey, would you like your social security number and your banking information to, they can relate to that. Whereas when I was in compliance, I was talking about things that people are like, we don't know what you're talking about. You're being silly. But you can make it personal, right? and talk about the personal risk. And once they think about it that way, then they're like, oh, wait, yeah. So.
Lyndon, storytelling. I love this.
Yeah.
The role and value of storytelling.
That's pretty interesting. You mentioned that, Maria, because I've had many instances where whether it's the our head of IT or our chief operating officer, they'll shoot me an email and say, hey, I was contacted by so and so company, and they said they got my information from this place, and so they for them, they understand it from being a consumer, being a user, that it's upsetting when you start getting calls or emails, or you start getting bugged by a company, and you're wondering, how did they get my information? And at times they'll ask, hey, where'd you get my information? And they'll say, yeah, we got it. You participated in some kind of promotion and we got your information from there. And, it kind of opens eyes. They're like, did I agree that my information could be shared for other purposes? Things like that. And it kind of helps when you're trying to develop policies or really update or revise your policies around the handling of data. And it also serves well. I mean, we work a lot with very closely with our marketing teams as well. And really, it's a matter of just having that conversation and educating them on, that the data, try to, data minimization, for example, if you don't need, their mother's maiden name and their oldest son's date of birth, why are you collecting it, for example? Gather the data that you need and let them know you're gathering it, these pieces of information for a particular reason, and don't go beyond that, because you're exposing the company. And even though you may not have any ill intent, what if there's a data breach of some kind, and now we have that data in our database that gets breached, and now that information's out there. So it's a good way to start that conversation, continue that conversation with, for example, our marketing teams.
Yeah, speaking of collaboration, we collaborated with HR quite a bit, right? And towards the end of my tenure at Cushman, one of the challenges that we were wrestling with the HR team was, our DEI initiatives, especially in Europe, right, where they wanted to send around employee surveys to collect all types of DEI data. I mean, you could imagine, your sexual orientation and and the like. And I was like, wait, I would say, do we really need to know that? Like, do we have an obligation to report on it? If we have a regulatory obligation to report on it as part of our DEI reporting, then okay, we can have that conversation. But if you just start asking these questions so that you can, generate some nice marketing materials about, statistics, not so fast, right? So that was a challenge. But again, required, to your point, Lyndon, collaboration with that group, because they don't necessarily think about the privacy aspects of what they're doing. And so we tried in the GDPR fashion to, implement privacy by design. And it was like, as you're doing this, you need to think about the privacy ramifications of it.
So I don't want to get too deep in that one specific example where anybody is put on the spot, but I mean, when I'm having conversations on this show, I often end up to a point where I say it's often technology rooted. Why did you set up the cloud that way and expose that port with that service to put yourself at risk? Why did you do that in the first place? Why did you set up that machine that requires that it's patched 4 times a month right? Versus a different one that doesn't need to be? So a lot of my conversations are like that. But when I look at privacy and data, it's the same idea. To your point, Maria, don't collect the data, don't store the data if you don't need to. But in your example, this isn't necessarily a product being built or a new database being set up in Salesforce. This is something that HR or marketing probably spun up. And I guess the point I'm trying to get to is who oversees that? Somehow you got alerted to it, right? Presumably before something took place. But so take the realities aside, maybe from both of you, share some examples of things that could happen and how you actually kind of monitor these rogue scenarios from putting the company at risk.
I'll tell you that, sometimes you just find out by accident, Sean. I mean, I don't know, Lyndon, what your experience was, but, you absolutely, the way that my experiences were, either I would hear of something in the course of my operation as a chief compliance officer, right, and being part of the board and listening to board conversations, and then I'd bring it to my privacy team and the CISO, and I'd say, hey, Eric, did you know that, or it'd be the other way around. He would hear something and then come to me, and then either from a compliance perspective or a privacy perspective, I would send a note and say, hey, can we just chat about this, right? Sometimes it was that they reached out to us. It just depended who within the organization with whom we were dealing. They would know that, our approach was privacy by design in post GDPR world, which is a requirement. And so they would loop us in. But honestly, sometimes you would just, you'd sort of find out by accident. Most of the time we found out before it got too far down the road, because if it got too far down the road, then, especially if it was a business initiative, from a commercial initiative from the business teams, that became a little bit challenging. I can't really think of an example that I could, probably even one that I could talk about, but I can't think of an example that where it went so far that, I'd look back and say, how come, you put something in that we'd have to patch 4 times a month and the privacy equivalent of that, right? But yeah, in reality, it was, sometimes I'd hear about it by accident. Lyndon, how about you?
I think that is probably how we hear about probably at least 70% of these types of situations where, they're working on a particular project, or let's say it's a marketing initiative where they got this great plan where we're going to launch the sweepstakes, and all they got to do is provide this types these pieces of information to enter, and it's like, okay, well, why didn't we know about this earlier? It's usually later on that you find out about this. And in some cases, look, some cases, it's still very a primitive type of a marketing initiative where it's like, okay, we could pull back on that, which is what you hope for, that if you do catch something like that it's something that you could roll back fairly easy. So that really was the bulk of how we find out about these things. I do think it's really important building that relationship for a compliance team and privacy team to be able to build that relationship with the business teams, whether it's marketing or sales or even HR, just the various teams. and having, it's having the communication and the relationship to where, maybe the first 3 times, they didn't think about asking you about whether, what information can I collect. But over time, as you build that relationship, you're going to be top of mind. They'll be like, oh, I do remember now that, let me run this by our compliance team or privacy team and see if this is okay. And that is, I think that's, kind of, that's where we need to get, is, and organizations need to get to, is to where, you can have that relationship, and legal or compliance is not going to be the last stop before launch day tomorrow. It's going to be something to think about early on, and you can weigh in early on and kind of make sure we're going down the right track, and not have to spend a ton of money trying to fix something that could have been caught earlier.
I'm very afraid to introduce acronyms because we have many of them, or birds words. But all I can think about, again, I having built apps in the past, all I can think about is engineering and development and the DevOps process, where you have developers and operations, and those two come together and something beautiful happens, and then we insert security and it becomes DevSecOps and everybody gets pissed off. Do we need something like that for privacy, for HR PrivOps? That's where I was getting scared to introduce something new. But do we need a more formal privacy or piece that gets plugged into programs that aren't just apps, but programs that other business teams run?
Linda, do you want me to, or do you want to?
I could start off, and obviously, Maria, you could add on to it. I think it's important. I think that's not a bad idea. In fact, I think it's a good idea overall. But I think it's something where in the processes, like like whether on the in a legal department where there's the contract process, or in IT, or information security, when they review contracts or initiatives. I think privacy needs to be a part of that. I think sometimes they do think about information security at some point in the process, but I think privacy needs to have a seat at the table, or they need to be part of that checklist of teams that need to be coordinated with before you press on to the next step of a project. So yeah, I think that it makes sense to include privacy and compliance in that.
Yeah, it would be part of the governance process, right?
Yeah.
That gets put into place. But to your point earlier, Lyndon, I think you're right. Once you have created those relationships with whomever in the organization, the business, HR, sales. In my case, I'm telling you, it was a CISO. He and I were like a team that we just, it couldn't get past us. If one of us learned about it, it was he would call me, and vice versa. But once you develop those partnerships, then you're naturally brought into that governance process. It's just a matter of time.
Maria, talk to me about the broader view of this. So not just the business leaders, but every user and every, I don't know if we want to go to every partner, there may be too much, but kind of the idea that it's a mindset. Lyndon kind of alluded to it earlier, that 2 or 3 times they didn't think about it, the third, fourth, and fifth time it's in their mind, right? That happens somehow. It can happen by finding out 70% of the time that it shouldn't have happened, and we fix it, or you can be a little more proactive and kind of help spread the mindset, the culture, if you will, build a culture, right, that has privacy in mind. Even if the processes aren't completely formal, at least people are thinking and acting a certain way.
Yeah, we did that with, when I was at Cushman, we did that with the contracting process, for example, right? So, we would have agreements, master services agreements with some of our larger, more global customers, and those agreements would contain, DPAs, data processing agreements, and, standard clauses from the GDPR. And we worked with the legal team because they were not responsible for privacy. It was my team. I mean, I'm a lawyer, but our legal team straight up who did the contracting wasn't. And so, they knew that that they had to send those agreements over to me to review, those sections, right, or to my, some of the people on my privacy team. And that was a matter of just communication. And as GDPR came out, I mean that was part of our GDPR program, right? It was like, okay, so now we have this process that has to happen where Devanzo and her team have to review, and it was a list of all those, whatever the clauses and stuff were. And frankly, the legal team was happy to throw it over the fence, right? Because they were like, we're not experts in this, we don't care about, we're going to talk about the commercial terms and indemnities and all that other good stuff. But, and then once you get the word out to the transactional lawyers, right, then they really were instrumental in explaining it to the business guys, right? Because sometimes just because the business guys would be like, why is this taking so long, right? And we need a privacy review. And sometimes the privacy provisions were so complicated or were onerous at the request of the customer that I would go to outside counsel. And, I'd say, listen, I had a go-to guy who was great, commercially reasonable and all of that good stuff. And so then the business teams understood that they had to loop in legal early because legal had to loop in privacy, and it would just slow everything down if they didn't do that. And so, more broadly, that word got out in the organization that, we have this group and their responsibility is for privacy. And so, that was sort of how we did it at a broader level.
So we're coming up on near the end here, sadly.
This has been fun.
I know, it's super fun.
Yeah.
But what I want to do is maybe break out the crystal ball, right? Each of us grab a crystal ball. And you touched on the SEC breach notification. It's kind of a monkey wrench in the works for some folks, perhaps. Are there things coming regulation-wise, notification-wise? I don't know if other notification, penalty-wise, legal-wise, I don't know, whatever. Is there anything on the horizon, you think, known or unknown, that privacy leaders should really start to think about?
Lyndon, you have your crystal ball handy?
Here it is. I'm juggling the crystal ball. Yeah, I think that, and again, this is something I've got to get smart on and really dig into. But the world of AI is upon us, and that is an area that's going to continue to grow. And there's a lot of traps out there from a privacy and data protection perspective that we've got to really take it seriously and really start delving into it and understanding, okay, how is this going to affect how we operate? How will it affect how we collect and manage the data that we collect from our consumers? And I think that is kind of where there's going to be. I think that's kind of where the big story will likely be over the next 5 years, if not even further out as well.
Will it help bring consistency and kind of level set things, or is it just going to screw everything up, do you think?
I guess, and I wish I could. I wish I had a good answer for that. My guess is it may slow things down a little bit in terms of progressing, and especially in the U.S. with regards to the various laws, state laws, with regards to a federal privacy law. It may slow things down because if the legislators are thoughtful in what they're doing, or looking ahead, they'll realize that, hey, let's not just roll something out that for the sake of getting something out there and getting a vote from voters that I did something for privacy and stuff like that, and really think about let's build something that could be adjusted and to what the future may bring in the privacy and data protection realm to come.
Yeah, I'm not so sure we're going to see a federal law, anytime soon, right? I think with all these state proposed bills, in addition to the 5 that are already there. I think to your point, Sean, the inconsistencies are probably just going to continue. And it will just depend, on what state you're in and what kind of program. And obviously the response to that from a business perspective, and Lyndon, you and I talked about this, just like with GDPR, it's like you're going to have to put a program in that, just rises to the highest level, right? So if it's CCPR, or CCPA, whatever, that's the most stringent, no matter what state you're in, you're going to have to, your whole program's going to have to look like that. But I would agree that, AI is it's super interesting. I think it raises all kinds of risk issues, beyond privacy, frankly, that people aren't even thinking about. I read an article the other day about, the potential disclosure of, material non-public information through people putting stuff into this AI chatbot to get, letters issued or articles written or what have you. And they're not thinking, users are not thinking of the implications of, what they're doing. And I think you're right, Lyndon, privacy is certainly one of the red flags that will come from it. And I would agree, if these lawmakers are being thoughtful, that they'll, slow down and say, hey, wait, we need to consider all of this. But, being a bit cynical, I'm not so sure we're going to see that happen either, because politicians are politicians and they want votes. And so they may just come out with a law that will have to be amended later on. So it's going to be interesting to see how AI, it has an effect on privacy.
Yeah, I'm hopeful it can be used to kind of tamp things down a bit, but I can also see it just taking off in just the simple chatbot example, where customers are sending sensitive information they shouldn't because they feel comfortable chatting with the bot,
Right.
and employees responding with, "Oh yeah," or maybe they use the chat bot to craft their response and they're feeding it information.
Right.
So there's all those scenarios. It's super, super interesting. We could probably have another whole conversation just on that. For now, I think we have our hands full with just regulations and kind of getting our head wrapped around all those differences. And to your point, we didn't get too deep into it, but kind of just set the high water mark, as you kind of alluded to there, Maria. Where's the mark you need to reach for the most stringent, and kind of work from there. I think it can get super complex if you try to save money and go lower where you don't need to, or cordon off systems that don't need to follow the same rules. But if you're having those thoughts, that's a good start, in my opinion. If you're not doing anything because it seems too hard, that's kind of not the right path. AI or not, have the thought at least, and have the conversations with your executive leadership team and the board if they're open to it, and with each other, like we're doing here. Maria and Lyndon, thank you so much for coming together and having this conversation, and for sharing your thoughts and insights with our audience here. Any final thoughts?
No, just thank you so much for the opportunity to come here and to chat with you and talk about privacy. It's such an important area, and great to have it the conversation in the context, your context of cybersecurity, and with the audience that you have, because I know I've said it a lot, but I think it's a super important partnership, privacy and cybersecurity. So it's really great to have the opportunity to speak to your audience. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sean, for this opportunity to really talk about. It's an important topic, and everybody is really looking around trying to find out what do other people think about this or that, and it's nice to have this conversation, as well as a lot of your other podcasts have been really helpful, and I think hopefully this will be helpful as well.
Everybody has a question. hopefully some of them get answered. All right. Well, thank you both so much, and thanks everybody for listening. There'll be links to Maria and Lyndon's profiles and any resources either of you want to share to help people continue to learn after they listen to this or watch this. That'd be great. And those will be in the show notes, whatever you provide. And keep on keeping on with security and privacy, everybody. Thanks, everybody.
We hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you learned something new and this story made you think, then share ITSP Magazine with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our columns. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.